Over the past few years, I've generated over $100 million for e-commerce brands through email marketing. And the truth of it is that most of this revenue actually isn't even coming through campaigns. It's coming through automated flows inside of Klaviyo. And really, what sucks is that at the end of the day, most brands are either sending nothing and setting up nothing whatsoever, or they're setting up 15 flows that are just differentiated and way too much and they're overwhelming the customer, leading to poor performance. So what I've found is that there are 7 core flows that really just create and form your foundation. And these are the ones that I'm going to walk through today, as far as the ones that you can set up that are just basic, as well as some advanced versions that we actually set up for clients to scale them up to 7, 8 figures. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how to set those up. Before we dive into the 7 flows though, I want to take a few minutes just to dive into Klaviyo really quick and kind of walk you through the building blocks. I'm talking time delays, triggers, conditional splits, trigger splits, everything, so that when we go through the actual strategy board that I'm about to show you, you can build the exact same strategies inside of Klaviyo using the same building blocks. It's just going to make it very easy. So let's get through this. But if you're looking to jump straight into the strategies, you can skip right to it. There's some bookmarks down below to get right to it, but I'm going to jump into Klaviyo right now and walk you through it. All right, so here we are inside of Klaviyo, which is our preferred just email platform when it comes to anything e-com related. So we're going to go to flows, which are our automated sequences on the left-hand side, and go here, and you're going to be brought to this screen. And we're going to, essentially go ahead and for any flow, we're going to go up here to the top and create a flow. From here, you can use and start with some of the essentials. If you watch my abandoned checkout video, you can get some of the, dynamic blocks through this. It makes it a little bit easier. But in this case, I'm going to just walk through the building blocks and kind of understand exactly what it means to actually create a flow. So in this case, we're going to go to build your own, and we're just going to call this sandbox just for short, so I can walk you through the different modules. So just a pieces of terminology here. A trigger is essentially what kind of just starts the flow. So it can be triggered by an event, can be triggered by somebody being added to a list. Here on the right side are some of the more popular ones. It can be triggered by a bunch of different things, even custom metrics that you decide to set up in your backend. For many of the different things, it's going to be event related. Typically you're working with like Shopify. So if somebody starts to check out, somebody places an order, those are just examples of event-based triggers. If you're added to a list because you were added to and signed up for a pop-up, again, different types of triggers. So in this case, we're just going to click on a checkout started one, just to show you what an event-based one looks like. So in this case, I'm going to click on the Shopify one, and now we have our trigger set to checkout started. Now on the right-hand side, I'm going to go through this as well. The trigger filter are filters that we set based on the essentially event data, and it's tied essentially to whatever's in the checkout started event. So in examples of this might be, hey, what's inside of the cart that the person has brought into checkout. So things like what's their item names, everything like that. Profile filters are going to be things that are tied specifically to the person doing that. So for example, have they placed an order in the past? Have they, for example, are they subscribed? These are kind of things that are tied specifically to the profile and not necessarily the event that is actually triggering it. So key distinction there. And then a big thing to remember about filters is that filters are set up such that if people are abiding to them, such that they are valid about going through the filters. So for example, if I set up a filter right now that says add profile filter, has let's see, what has someone done? If I say that they haven't placed an order 0 times since starting the flow, which is what you do want to set up, for example, for a abandoned checkout type of flow, this would say that, hey, if somebody does place an order while they're in this flow, kick them out of it. So this is how we're able to segment down for these automated sequences to make sure the right messaging is going to the right people. So this is a very important concept to understand. And when you go through different logic pieces using and or statements, it does get a bit complicated, but this is how we're able to cater our messaging in the correct way to really just go after the people that we're after. So those are the filters. Those are the trigger filters, the profile filters. That's the trigger. We're going to hit save. We're going to hit confirm and save. And now we have ourselves a flow. Now on the left-hand side, there are specific things that I'm going to cover right now. There are other things that are more advanced, and I might do a different video on that. But the ones that we're going to be concerned about today are going to be things like our email action. So this is, for example, going to create us an email. And if I went in here, I would be able to set up the subject line, preview text, actually create the email. And that's where you're going to go through and select your template, build out your emails. If you want to turn on smart sending, enable UTM tracking, you can do that all here. You can also change the email name, but that really is just your actual deliverable. In this case, other things that we want to keep in mind are things like time delays. So for example, if I put like 1 day inside of here, if someone checks out, it's going to wait 1 day to send this next email. So these are very, very key for timing out exactly how much time we should be waiting between things. So if I, for example, wanted to say, hey, let's wait another day after this, I can do that. And then I can send my second email after that. So I can add another email here, and it's going to wait another day to send email number 2. So very, very good and key concepts here. And then lastly, what I want to cover before we keep going to the actual strategies are conditional splits and trigger splits. Again, this goes to actually what we were talking about before when we were looking at the triggers for trigger filters and profile filters. Very, very key here. So if we go over to conditional split, this is going to be based off of profile filters. If we go over to trigger split, that's going to be based on the data inside of the trigger. So for example, if I was doing a trigger split up here, it would be based off of things like, in this case, because this is a test account, there's not all the data in here, but this could then split it based off of value of said cart contents, in this case for the checkout started event. If I wanted to, for example, split based off of if they had purchased before, I could go again like this. What has someone done? Placed order 0 times over all time. And what this does is, hey, if somebody's placed an order 0 times over all time, they're going to go to the yes logic branch over here. If they have placed an order because they fail that conditional split, they will go to the no side. So anybody who's placed 1 or more orders will go to the right hand side. So this is all just very, very key to understand when we go through our actual strategy and go through our different series and whatnot. But conditional split, trigger split, time delays, emails themselves, and triggers, I think we're good to go. So with that being said, let's jump right into the board. All right, so I now have on my screen the 7 essential flows, and we're gonna go through. It's gonna look very, very familiar to your Klaviyo setup and everything. So it should be very, very simple to actually replicate and follow on your own. But I'm gonna go through it. At the top, you're gonna see your basic versions, and at the bottom, you're gonna see some more advanced versions that we might build out at the agency type level. Going through some of my thinking, I'll talk through that here in a second. But at the very least, the basic versions are gonna work for pretty much every single brand. I'll talk through some nuances and whatnot, but let's get right into it. Let's dive into the welcome series and go through exactly how that needs to be structured and what that should look like. So as far as a welcome series is concerned, this is the type of flow that people are realistically going to get when they opt in through like a pop-up, or they're getting synced as a customer via purchasing or checkout started. There's an entire fiasco on that I would cover at a different time. But welcome series is essentially your welcome bit to the brand. In the case of if you're acquiring a customer for $20, $30, $50, $60, you want to create this nurture sequence that takes people through because you've collected their email, and now is when you can create essentially this catered experience to your introduction to your brand. So in this case, if you're running a pop-up and you're getting a good conversion rate there, 7-10%, you're going to get a lot of people going through this welcome series. And it's key to actually capitalizing on, hey, making sure that this is well structured and that we have that offer being presented all the way to doing a type of last chance. But how this is going to look like is that your trigger is going to be when someone joins, in this case, a newsletter list. This might be something named a little bit different inside of your account, but for example, if you have your pop-up set up to create and push to people to the newsletter, and the key thing you want to make sure is that your newsletter is set to single opt-in instead of double opt-in. That's going to severely affect your conversion rates here. But from there, what we're going to want to do is we're going to send this first email, this welcome and offer thing. So we're going to deliver that promised discount if you're offering 10, 15, 20% gift with purchase, and you're going to immediately capture that, show that there, make sure that they have that email there, because then you may be putting that code in that pop-up, but they're going to want to come back to this as like their anchor point. So this you're going to use this to for one, introduce your brand. You're going to use this to capture your sales. You're going to deliver that discount, and you're going to go from there to building that interest and whatnot into these next following emails. One thing I want to call out here as far as the trigger filters, you're going to make sure that there's nobody who's placing order after this, because if they do place an order, you want to kick them out of this welcome series. You want to make sure that if they're getting to checkout, you want to put them through the abandoned checkout, which we'll talk about in a second. And then same thing if you're running a abandoned cart type of sequence, we want to make sure that that's obviously going to that flow at that point to handle that more high essentially level traffic that's more at that point where they're probably going to convert. All right, so let's go down. So that email is going to be sent out immediately. We're going to wait a day. We're going to then send a social proof email. This is if you have a good amount of reviews, any kind of press mentions, bestsellers. This is where you really want to start putting any kind of content you have. Even UGC is great here, but essentially you want to make it so that people are looking at your brand in a way that's like, hey, This isn't just any brand that's trying to sell me. They actually have people who are enjoying my product or enjoying the product. And it gives just more credibility. When people see faces, and I talk through this inside of the email strategy I broke down, but when people see faces and names and whatnot, there's a lot more credibility that comes out of that. So we really want to capture down on that, especially when people are at the level where they're like, hey, is this a brand that I want to engage with? Is this not something I want to engage with? So it's key to actually talk about that here. We're going to wait another day. And what you're going to notice here is that this is actually pretty quick as far as the cadence here. The reason being is that this traffic is hot. We really, really want to keep and push as much as we can as far as education at this level. When we get to more of like an abandoned checkout type of thing, the traffic is even hotter because they've obviously went through the add to cart portion and they now at checkout. But this is right now very, very surface level, and we're really trying to educate them about the brand. So, third email is going to be a founder story. So in this case, this can either be a plain text email, this can even be a branded type of hybrid email, but we're going to share more about the brand. You're going to have the founder speak to the backstory about why they created the brand. This kind of builds that more emotional connection that you're going to really see it convert very, very highly in this level. And this is very, very essential if you have a founder-led brand. You can kind of switch this out with maybe a bestseller feature or a benefits type of thing if you really do want to go down the benefit side. So obviously this can be catered towards the brand itself, but this is obviously a very, very good email to have, especially if you're trying to humanize the brand. After that, for that fourth email, what we're going to want to do is a last chance type email. We're going to remind them about the offer. This is really going to be pushing those, in this case, I call them fence sitters, but this is what I recommend with every agency client. If we are running some kind of offer, you're pushing 10, 15, 20% in that welcome series, make it time limited. For me, myself, I'm not going to really take action unless you give me a deadline. So in this case, tell them that, hey, this is the last chance. This offer is going to expire in 24 hours. You either use it or you lose it. In this case, we know that, hey, this person either needs potentially a different kind of incentive to get over the line, or realistically, they just weren't here to purchase in the first place. So let's move them into something else. Maybe they'll be converted by like a promo you're running on the campaign end, or we just realistically need to potentially move them towards a sunset and kind of get them off the list. So always recommend having a last chance type email in any kind of flow that we're running when any kind of offers going, just a key portion of that. So that's the welcome series, and I think that's a good place to end. Now I'm going to cover really, really quickly what an advanced type of setup might look like. So, and if you're doing this, there's a lot of things that you're going to keep into account here. When somebody joins your newsletter may be a general list. And the problem with that is that many people, and this is what I see across many, many different accounts, is that their newsletter is that general list. So they have the people from their pop-up, they have their Shopify sync, all sync into the same thing. So what I recommend doing is that, hey, if the source itself of people joining it is because it was pop-up, then yes, let's push them towards that, give them that discount and whatnot. But if they're not, that's when we can start doing some change in messaging, because they're either syncing because it's a checkout started and they realistically don't need that, or it's syncing through something else and that we can't account for. So in that case, we're still going to push them down the no side here, and we can start building this out here. I know that I put end for both of these conditions because it just depends on the brand and where that traffic may be coming, but that's just something key to keep in mind. And this is just a very, very easy way to really, really segment and clean up your welcome series to the point where you're making sure that the people who are actually opting in through the pop-up are the ones getting that actual sequence here, where they're getting nurtured through that. So just something to keep in mind. I've seen welcome series where you can actually break it down by pop-up, you break it down by lead form. There's a lot of different ways as to how people are getting onto the list, and being able to cater and personalize that messaging beyond just, hey, we're going to send this welcome and offer email to everybody who opts in. That's where you start losing in terms of, hey, if you did create something that's catered to, hey, I opted in through this, or I opted in through this, then you're going to obviously see that continuity of messaging, which is going to convert just a whole lot better. So, with that being said, you're going to still kind of see the same kind of strategy here. Obviously I copied and pasted it from the top, but you can always cater and adjust your thing to personalize it to the actual person going through it. So that's where I'm going to stop with the welcome series, and we're going to move on to our next flow. Once you've captured subscribers through the welcome series, the next thing we want to do is that once they get to checkout, which is going to be the highest intent thing for any e-com store, we want to make sure we capture them. And with almost 3/4 of your carts going abandoned, this is really where you're going to see your most ROI beyond your welcome series. If you have like a wide attribution setting, that's an entire other conversation. But this is where you're going to see the most recovered revenue. So it's very, very vital that we actually structure this in a very, very high intent way, because these people, they're right at the line and we just want to get them right over that. So let's get right into it, and what this is kind of structured as. So again, a trigger is going to be when they checkout started, and that's the one that's called for Shopify. And the trigger filters are going to be that we're going to make sure that they haven't placed an order since starting this, because if they have, then this is irrelevant. We're also going to add something that they haven't been in the flow in the last 14 days, so we're not spamming the people who constantly get to checkout. That's just a key thing there for user experience. So keep that in mind. And what this is going to look like is it's actually pretty simple. We're going to do a quick, 30-minute time delay, and then we're going to do a quick reminder. So we're going to follow up. This is very, very simple. No need to get fancy with this. No discounts, anything like that, but show the exact items that they left behind. Something along the lines of like, hey, you left this behind, whatever it might be. You can get creative with the messaging here, but there does not have to be any kind of incentive on this. I think that's where a lot of people mess up. If you do kind of do an incentive, and I'll cover this here inside of the advanced version, but you can start doing splits. You can split by if it's a prospect versus a returning customer, and that's where you can get a little more fancy with it. But at the very least, this is what you can run. So we're going to do a quick reminder. We're going to wait a day. We're then going to still show the products in the cart, but if we can, we're going to start showing reviews and testimonials. And if you have a smaller SKU list, this is obviously a bit easier. You can add reviews for those specific items. If you're a little bit bigger, you may have to be a little bit more general with the reviews you're showing. And this is where it gets into potentially where you can talk about, I'm going to cover that here in a second, but this is where you really want to focus on that social proof. So similar to what we were doing with the welcome series, we want to show people that, hey, these items that you have in your cart, they're being reassured by other people are loving it. Kind of reduces that doubt. So from there, we're going to wait another day. We're going to do some more objection handling. Whether it's like, hey, we have a guarantee on the items, we have, shipping, return, everything is kind of being addressed here that can be addressed here. Essentially, we're just going to remove anything that's going to essentially, stop them from actually making that next step. So be it FAQs, whatever the information might be. And this is why it's very, very vital to actually understand the product you're selling, because this is where you can start introducing that piece of information that they may be missing that's actually just waiting to get them over that hurdle. From here, this is when we can actually start pulling levers. So in this case, you can introduce a targeted offer, 15%, 10%, whatever it might be, free shipping, whatever that final nudge might be, because maybe it is a price conscious customer. Now I don't have it here, but you can actually add another email after this, like I talked about with the welcome series, and add a last chance to that discount. Again, make the discount, 48 hours, 24 hours, whatever it might be, and then add in, a last chance thing, follow up with that, make it seem urgent, right? At the end of the day, and you're going to see a very, very good level of, in terms of just capturing that lost revenue that would otherwise just flow away through this sequence. So, what does an advanced version of this look like? Let's go down into here and kind of look at that. So, I called this out, I guess, earlier, but when someone checks out, we want to check, hey, have you either placed before or have you not? And the reason I say that is because in many cases, you need to be catering that messaging to the person. So for example, if somebody has returned back to your thing, they realistically do not need discounts. And at the end of the day, we want to preserve our margins. We want to make it so that we're making as much money as possible. So we can also cater that messaging to say that, hey, you've been here before, cater that messaging to them, show that loyalty nudge. I'm going to browse down here, for example, loyalty recognition on the second email. We're going to do some social proof on the second or the third email, kind of show some urgency. And then if we really, really wanted to, we can still do an exclusive incentive, but we're waiting a lot longer on this one. So we're doing 1 day delay, 2 delay, or 2 day delay, and then a 3 day delay. So a lot longer than what we're doing on the first, which is for those prospects, because these are the people who are hot. These are typically the people that we're focused on trying to get people over the line on that conversion. And this is where we're trying to get back that ad spend. So, with that said, if you wanted to, you can move the discount up a little bit higher. There's a lot that you can do here beyond just, obviously waiting to send that discount at the end. But like I said before, this is where you can get more advanced with it. This is where we're talking about those splits. And that's why it's important to understand, hey, at the end of the day, do people who are coming back need that a little bit of incentive? Maybe not. There are other things you can test in here. You can test, for example, hey, is the cart value over $100? Maybe I only want to offer an incentive for people who are checking out with something that's more expensive. That's a common thing that we see a lot with the clients that we deal with. Another thing, for example, is the main SKU inside of there. Maybe I can start speaking to, in many cases, we have a lot of brands that we work with where there is a main SKU where you can start speaking to specific benefits. You can say things like, hey, you're missing out on XYZ benefit, and you can't obviously say that for other products, but if you know that it's in their cart, then you can start speaking to it. Like, this is where you can start catering things really to the brand and whatnot. And that's where we're going to start seeing more of those incremental returns, just because it's that much more catered as far as the messaging. And that's where you can really speak to their pain points. So that's what an abandoned checkout looks like on an advanced end. And you're going to see a much, much better return on this versus the more basic version. if you have the resources and whatnot to execute on it. But again, at the end of the day, we're all the same here. We're trying to recover as many carts as we can, and setting up that basic version up above is going to at least start to do that. All right, so now we're going to take a step up from where we were with the abandoned checkout and go right one step up to the, essentially the previous level in the funnel, which is the abandoned cart when people actually add it to their cart. This is messaging, it's a little bit less obviously high leverage as like the abandoned checkout because they haven't quite gotten there, but still a very, very valuable thing to have. In this case, it's a little bit more peeled back as far as the strategy and whatnot here. But for example, let's go through exactly what a basic step looks like here. So in this case, the trigger is going to be when someone's added to cart. The trigger filters are going to be placed order 0 times and starting the flow. Checkout started 0 times and starting the flow. So if they do obviously start their checkout, we want them to go to the abandoned checkout flow. And then again, we want to make sure that they haven't been in this flow in the last 14 days, because if they keep adding to cart, they're going to continually fire this. We want to make sure we're not spamming them. So let's get through this. So we're going to wait 2 hours, then we're going to do a reminder. So very, very similar to what we were doing at the abandoned checkout. This is just a simple nudge to say like, hey, you added this to your cart. This is your total cart contents. If you want to get back, obviously a reminder to get them back there. Then we're going to wait 1 day and we're going to start covering any kind of benefits, whether it be quality, return policies, anything like that. So anything that kind of reassure about trust. So especially if you're in the health industry, you can start covering general benefits of the products you have, and that'll apply to most things. But this is where you can start adding on to that. And then from there, you can start doing just a simple incentive. That's going to help obviously recover those more hesitant buyers. But you need to remember that this is a step up from the abandoned checkout. So in many cases, we actually don't do an incentive at this level. This is more so just to get them down to the next piece. And if we can't get them from there, then we're going to still obviously have our campaigns coming into here to push them down lower. So very, very simple. In many cases, you may see this as a less intrusive version of the abandoned checkout, but this is still very, very valuable because it is an event that we can leverage to actually use it as a starting point to email them. So that's the the cart abandonment, and I think it's still a very, very valuable flow to have. Still see some success from it. Obviously not as much as the abandoned checkout, which is that more high intent thing, but still very, very valuable. All right, so taking yet another step up, this is the browse abandonment, and this is actually very, very valuable from the sense that this is going to very, very much assist with your campaign sending, because these are I essentially call them window shoppers. But when somebody views your product, if you're not kind of leveraging that as a essentially a starting point, you're kind of losing out on essentially a very, very high volume event. The reason being is that a lot of people are going to view products and they're not necessarily going to add it to their cart. They may not get to checkout. And if you can leverage this, especially with your campaign sending, you're going to see great, great success. So when someone views the product, that's going to be the trigger. We're going to have some filters set up, and it's, we're going to make sure that they haven't placed an order. Obviously, we're going to make sure that they haven't gotten to checkout, and also make sure they haven't added to cart. And then we're going to put that 7-day filter right there to make sure that we're not blasting and spamming these people. Very, very key, because this is such a high volume event. And then once we're going to wait, put a time delay there. We're only going to wait 2 hours. And all we're going to really do here is follow up with their last viewed item. So we're going to remind them of the exact product that they browsed alongside the image and CTA. Those dynamic things similar to what we were doing with the abandoned checkout flow are actually available inside of Klaviyo. And all you need to do is actually pull their template, and you can use that, but it'll actually feature the exact product that they last viewed, and then we can push them towards that. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to just do a 1-day delay, and then we're going to follow up with some general social proof. This doesn't have to be that complicated as far as the level here. Now I'm going to cover an advanced strategy as far as how this might look like if you have specific SKUs and whatnot. But this, at the end of the day, is to get people who are just looking in the window, looking at the product, back on site to say that, hey, you're reviewing this, get back on site, take another look at it. And this is where you can start leveraging that as a very, very key event. So let's get right into what an advanced version of this looks like down below. So an advanced version of this is going to split it by the item. And what I mean by that is that if, for example, I'm browsing the main SKU, that's very, very valuable, and that's a key piece of personalization that I can utilize to create a very, very high converting type of email set. So if, for example, I browse that main SKU and that's the last thing I look at, then I'm going to get this specific sequence that is catered towards that main SKU. And because I can leverage it, I can now essentially make all the copy, the entire design specific to the benefits, the UVPs of that specific product, and speak to it. So So in this case, if it is, in this case, we're going to use a trigger split. Now I am using that main SKU. I'm going to wait 2 hours like we were before, and I'm going to send that browse abandonment email that's specific to that product. Again, I'm going to follow up with social proof, but again, because I know exactly what that product is, I can use the exact reviews for that specific product to actually sell them based on that, which is a huge leg up over using a more general catch-all. And you can stack up these trigger splits. So you can put its trigger split here, you can put trigger split here for another item, and you can keep stacking them to actually show per item the exact level of things, which you can do here on the left. And then on the right hand side, you can use that catch-all like we were using before with that more general approach. So last viewed, social proof, and related items. So yeah, that's what a more advanced type of setup looks like, and that's going to convert very, very well for you. Quick pause before we get into post-purchase flows. If you own a Shopify brand and this isn't something that you want to set up all by yourself, book a call using the first link in the description, and we'll just audit your account. We'll get an idea and map out exactly what your brand needs and see if we can do it for you. At the end of the day, I get it. This is a lot of stuff, and we do this for brands all the time in terms of multiplying their email revenue by using setups like this. And I think that this is something that's going to be very, very valuable for a lot of you. So if you're interested, book a call using the first link in the description and we'll have a chat. With that said, let's get right back into it. All right, so now this is the post-purchase nurture flow, and this is a key thing for customer experience. So very, very simple. We're going to trigger this based off of when they place that order. We're going to set the trigger filter as when they haven't placed any orders since starting that flow. So in this case, it's going to be very, very simple. We're going to wait just 10 minutes. We're going to send a thank you email. And this is very, very key, especially when it's a first-time customer or prospect. They want to make sure that they feel appreciated, right? So we're going to confirm the order. We're going to thank them. We're going to reinforce that choice. So in this case, we're just really just trying to reduce that post-purchase regret, and it kind of just, essentially nurture them along to say like, hey, you made the best choice. You're going to love it, and essentially make sure that they feel comforted. In this case, now we're going to wait typically 1 to 3 days, depending on what the shipping times and whatnot look like as far as fulfillment. This obviously just depends. And we're just going to share our brand values, strengthen, make sure that that emotional connection is built, make sure that we're just really getting them bought into the product they're about to experience. And this really does share it such that if you want to continue to use that founder-led angle, you can do so here. Then we're going to wait a few more days. And if you have any kind of product where you're kind of using something along the lines of, either there's kind of product tips, care instructions, or anything that they might use as far as usage, this is where we want to kind of communicate it, make sure that we're kind of spacing it out such that maybe they haven't received the product yet, but we want to make sure that they understand like, hey, this is how to get the most out of your product. And this also helps kind of reduce any kind of customer support cases, because it helps educate the customer. So in this case, I put that at the end there, reduces returns. That's something that's actually pretty key here. So any kind of product education, this is where you kind of want to put it. Then after that, we're gonna wait 7 to 10 days, and obviously making sure that your fulfillment set up for this. So if you do need to set up this, last email here as a separate flow based on like a delivered shipment type of trigger, which is available through Shopify, you can do so. This is where we're going to want to start doing any kind of cross-selling. Now, depending on what it is, you may have to use some kind of conditional splits or whatnot to obviously cross-sell the correct item. But if you're pretty general, then you can either use Klaviyo's product engine to actually recommend those. But this is a good spot because it is very, very key that we engage the customer as soon as possible because they're hot on the product. They've purchased it pretty recently, and we want to kind of ride the momentum, especially if we're trying to shorten that returning customer window. In that, maybe the typical thing is like 45 days. Obviously we just want to give more touch points. So in this case, this is what a basic level looks like. So let's get over to what a more advanced version of this looks like. All right, so now to the advanced version of this flow. So in the post-purchase nurture advanced version, this is where we're going to talk about things like splitting based off of if they've placed order for the second time, if it's only the first time that they've done it, because we want to try and change the messaging obviously based off of if they've done this only the first time or if they've done this back again and again and again. So in the case of this, obviously we can start making it even more complex if we want to even cater by, hey, what product did they purchase? Obviously maybe different product instructions, different tips and tricks and whatnot, but this is gonna be pretty simple. So you're gonna have a conditional split. If they placed order one time overall time, then we're gonna send them down this thing. So for a new customer, and if they're a returning customer, they're gonna get this, and they're gonna get more of a returning customer thank you, which is more of a founder letter type thing. So if they, thank them for coming back, that's going to very, very much improve the customer experience of how they're interacting with the brand. So with that being said, that's just a very, very, quick tweak that you can make to actually make sure that your emails are being personalized to the people that they're actually getting it, because obviously at the end of the day, it may not be a good experience for people getting the same emails that they got when they placed that order the first time. So in this case, you're obviously catering it to more so that, hey, I want to thank the customer for coming back, but if they're coming back a third, fourth, fifth time, maybe you don't have the resources to continually build out emails for that, and you can continue to obviously add more conditional splits, but in this case, we're going to just do that founder letter type for that first time returning customer, just thank them for coming back. So very, very obviously strong for a customer experience. Now, if you sell any kind of consumable or recurring product, this flow specifically is just crucial, because at the end of the day, if you're not reminding customers about reordering because either they're not on subscription or whatever it might be, this is just leaving money on the table. So when I talk to any kind of CPG brand, this is the first thing I look for to make sure that they're actually bringing more. So in this case, replenishment, very, very simple. Trigger is going to be that they place the order. The trigger filters are going to be that we make sure that they haven't obviously placed something since then. And we're also going to make sure that they haven't subscribed to anything. So in terms of the delays here, this does obviously depend on the typical brand. And the way that this is set up as far as a basic level is we're assuming a one product type of environment. So we're going to do average reorder time, and then we're going to add 5 days, because I like to make sure that, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they've potentially used it. And then we also want to just add a little bit of time to make sure that we're timing it correctly. So you may have to go through some kind of iterative process to actually test this out. But the first thing is going to be just a reminder. Notify them that, hey, you may be running low on that product, and just direct them back to the CTA to say, like, hey, refill now, stock back up, whatever it might be. But this does obviously keep them inside of that purchase cycle. Then we're going to just wait a few days after that. And because we're typically very, very keen in on, okay, we've already established that this customer has gotten the product, you can make sure, and you can do a conditional split on this as well. We're going to do either an incentive push, or we're going to do a subscription option type thing. In many cases, if you want to keep it evergreen, offer that subscription piece, because many cases, if you're doing a subscription, you may say, hey, subscribe and save. That's just a very, very common thing now in the D2C industry. So you can do that. Very, very simple thing. Wait a few days, say like, hey, subscribe, and then never forget it again. You're going to save some money. And there, obviously you get some more subscription type revenue, which is very, very strong to see, but that's a key thing that we can kind of capitalize upon. Now, I actually did not build a flow sequence in terms of a visual piece for a more advanced version, but what a more advanced version for this may actually look like is that you're going to still use this specific sequence, but you're going to put trigger splits at the top based off of the product. So let's say you have a CPG brand where you have different products that have different, essentially reorder times because they have different supply lengths. So in that case, you're going to have to split it up such that if something has like a 90-day average use time, then you're going to want to obviously wait a little bit more time for that. And then if it's something that's 30 days, you can set up something similar for that as well. But you can do trigger splits to actually segment it so that it's personalized to that specific piece. So that's more appropriate when you're delivering that message. So key thing there, this is just a huge thing for any kind of CPG or replenishment brand. You can also potentially leverage some of the predictive analytics from Klaviyo to actually do this, but this is a killer email flow when it comes to anything CPG consumable. Highly recommend. All right, so finally, last but not least, Winback. Now, this can obviously be catered, and I'm just obviously going to talk more about the advanced version just immediately because it is very, very key to this. You can obviously cater this to if you're really targeting either the one-time customer or just people in general. But if you're setting it up for in general, you're going to set trigger filters such that they haven't placed orders since starting the flow, they're not an active subscriber, but this is at the end of the day trying to get people back that realistically either not converting through your campaigns and whatnot, and maybe you do actually win them back through that. And that's where you can obviously use your Winback segments and whatnot, but this is an automated sequence that is set up that just essentially does it automatically for you. So again, trigger going to be based on the placed order. We're going to wait the average reorder time plus about 30 days. You can adjust that, A/B test that, figure out what works best for you. And we're going to start off by sending just a plain text email. Essentially, structure is coming from the founder. Do some kind of small offer. Essentially, this is like a thing to try and rekindle the relationship. Be like, hey, it's been a while since we saw you in terms of an order and whatnot. Just offering this up to you. Want to make sure you're feeling supported and whatnot. And it's going to, obviously kind of rekindle that relationship, potentially bring them back in the fold. We're going to then follow up with some, 2 to 3 day type thing with a social proof and a loyalty reminder saying like, hey, these are what people are enjoying right now. We saw that, obviously we know you've bought before. Want to, remind you as to why, maybe you're missing these different things. Maybe they've used the product at this point. I don't know, I'm talking about more of a consumable sense, but maybe they're missing out on different benefits and whatnot. And this we're try and obviously win them back. Then we're going to wait 7 days and just do a stronger incentive. So maybe something a little bit more deeper as far as the discount, exclusive deal. A lot of people in this case might be like, hey, maybe I don't want to put a stronger incentive at the end. My argument about this is that at the end of the day, realistically, when it comes down to a brand, whether it's a consumable brand or any other brand, you have the customer's attention for only a short while. And if they have the product in hand, they're getting reminded about it daily and they're seeing it. But as you continue to widen that attention span of like, hey, it's been a while since I've ordered, you have less and less affinity with the customer themselves. So you're going to have to offer either a stronger incentive, or you're going to have to make sure that you're constantly in their inbox. And it really just is an awareness game. So when we're playing it out at this level, this is why I was talking about before, if you want to cater it to specifically one-time customers, two-time customers, whatever you want to be, it kind of works in a way that we're trying to make sure that we bring them back in the fold. So typically it's done through a discount. That's typically where we kind of go through and see a little bit more success. Now you can obviously test some either more value-based content here or however you want to approach it from that level. But this is what's key to kind of seeing a more successful type of win back, at least from what we've seen as far as our results. Typically if we're doing something a little bit less incentive-based, we see a little bit less of results as a result. But these are obviously very, very key customers. They've bought before, so we want to make sure that we treat them with that level of respect. And there you have it, the 7 flows you need to actually form the foundation of your Klaviyo account. You can set up these basic versions and it'll cover about 95% of your retention revenue. And if you start layering in the advanced strategies that we covered, it'll even outperform your campaigns. So with that being said, you don't need 15 flows inside of your Klaviyo account to do everything. You need just these 7. And realistically, these 7 are going to cover pretty much every step in your customer journey, really just for the most part. Obviously, there's a few little gaps you can plug and whatnot. With that being said, you have 2 options at this point. You can either, one, take this flow build out and map and whatnot and take it and build it yourself inside of your own Klaviyo account, or 2, you can hire my team of experts to go in and just build this out from the start, build it out correctly, map out exactly what holes and whatnot that you need to be plugging. And from there, you can be just writing about your way, making sure that everything's firing as needed, and you can obviously scale to the moon from that point. If you're interested in option 2, book a call using the first link in the description, and I'll talk to you then.